to another video. My name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PayDirtDFS.com, and today we're going to be talking about some NFL preseason action. We have a whole bunch of games today going on across all of Saturday. We have an early slate and then two later slates. DraftKings, of course, split things up into three separate slates because that's what DFS sites like to do these days. But there's still plenty of prize pools up top, and there's still a lot of money to be made. So it is not going to be me specifically talking about these things. I brought in my friend here, David Hess, who is much better at this kind of thing than I am. This is something that we call a news aggregation sport. It's something where following beat reporters and looking into team reports and stuff that you have to go search for. I'm not super great at that stuff because I'm just a computer that does inputs and outputs. So I brought on David Hess. He's awesome. He's worked with me a lot before. You guys recognize him. So David, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Feels good to be doing a little bit of content again. It's been a while since I did really anything outside of talking in Discord, and I'm just happy to be able to be here and hopefully help people win some money.
Yeah, absolutely. And you wrote an article yesterday, right? How do you feel about how that went?
I feel good. I mean, the slate as a whole, I kind of missed the key player that won a lot of people a lot of money. Jerome Ford ended up scoring 2 touchdowns yesterday for Cleveland. I didn't touch on him for even a second. But the theory of the article, if how to pick players and everything else, I really like how it should be applicable to the rest of the slates and not just that one. So I still feel pretty good about it.
Cool, good. Yeah, I think it was a good article in introducing people into what preseason NFL is. Preseason NFL is some people think that it's the best sport in the world. I think that it is really, really hard to grasp because it doesn't make sense from a projection standpoint for me. But I think that it is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of money to be made. So today we're going to be breaking things down game by game. We're not going to do slate by slate, even though at the end of each slate of games, right, we're going to talk a little bit about the main points from that slate. But we're going to be going over quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and then if any tight ends matter. So today there is actually one tight end that matters a lot that you're going to want to have a lot of exposure to that we talked about a little bit before the show. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So the first game that we have on the slate is going to be this Kansas City-Chicago game. Kansas City, their starters are going to play the first quarter. I know that much. I don't know much about the Chicago side. So what about the quarterback situation here are you really looking at?
Yeah, so Andy Reid came out and said that all of his quarterbacks are going to play a quarter. So I think outside of Mahomes, that's probably a chalked spot where, there's multiple spots on there where we can get a quarter and a half to 2 quarters for different players. And, a quarter Mahomes might be worth something. But a quarter Chad Henne really isn't. So as far as the Kansas City side of that goes, it's pretty much Mahomes and nothing else. And then Chicago is kind of weird because, they said that they did plan to play. Let me pull it up. That the starters are planning to play. They didn't give us an exact measurement, so I would assume it's probably a couple series, maybe a quarter at the most. But then we have Nathan Peterman and Trevor Siemian afterwards, 2 guys that I don't really love. I mean, maybe a quarter and a half of Trevor Siemian is playable, but it's not something that I'd be running out to do.
Yeah, and you're not touching Nathan Peterman with a 10-foot pole, right? Like the guy is just trash.
I think I really actually like Kansas City's defense. I don't really pick defenses usually. I just randomize it, but I kind of like Kansas City's defense.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. I think that a quarter of Patrick Mahomes is really valuable. Mostly just because when you're looking at the raw talent level of these quarterbacks, it's not helped at all by game plan. It's not helped at all by different play calling tendencies. So outside of rushing QBs, it's is the quarterback good enough to make it work with vanilla? And I think that Patrick Mahomes is.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of for me that it's somewhere that you play Mahomes with, I think people are going to want to stack it, but I mean, it's unlikely that he throws more than a touchdown, I would say, even in a quarter. I mean, I saw multiple games yesterday where a quarter ended up being a series and a half, maybe 2 series. And it could go like that, where he barely plays and it sounds like it's going to be a lot, but it's not. So if you're running that route, I think maybe Mahomes with a pass catcher, But I feel pretty good that you can play at least one of those starters in most of your lineups, especially because it's a 3-game slate where, like, getting a piece of Juju or MVS or Kelsey all for a quarter still makes sense because of how they split up the slates.
For sure. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and move on to running backs in this game. Um, Running back, I think, is one of the more important things to nail in NFL preseason, and I always have issues doing so, which is why I don't play a lot of NFL preseason. But what are your thoughts on running back here?
So I do think that Isaiah Pacheco for Kansas City is probably going to play a lot today, but they have a lot of running backs. So, like, it really just is, like, he's been doing really good in practice, and they want to get him some game situations where, like, a lot of beat writers have talked about him. So, like, it's not like, hey, this is a cut and dry. They only have 4 running backs. Like, we're going to stuff them in here today. It's just kind of like a feeling play. So, I mean, it's not like a priority, I don't think. But, like, I think that he can be in the player pool and he's probably playable. But he's also probably going to be pretty chalked because most of the people that play preseason really just look for those, like, it players. Like, Romeo Doubs and Randall Robinson were 2 guys that are 30% plus the last 2 days. And it's like those rookies that everybody talks about ends up real chalk. So I like Pacheco for Kansas City, but I don't think he's a priority play, especially if everyone's going to be playing him. But on the other side, for Chicago, David Montgomery's supposed to sit. So, if that means Khalil Herbert runs as the ones and comes off the field in a couple series, we've really only got Darrington Evans, Treston Ebner, and Demontre Tuggle. And Ebner's really nice. So, like, I think Ebner on the other side, and also Tuggle, I don't know who Tuggle is, but I assume he's going to play because the other one's a fullback. But, like, Ebner and Tuggle, to me, are probably the top plays in this game.
I couldn't bring myself to play somebody named Demontre Tuggle. I could not play him in a regular DFS slate, right? Like, if he was the only running back available for Chicago, I don't think that I could click on somebody named Tuggle. Because, like, what are you going to do? You're going to win a GPP and you win the Millie Maker and then you have to go out there and buy a Tuggle jersey? You don't want to walk around in a Tuggle jersey. That sounds like an awful time.
It's actually funny because, like, all the summer league and preseason and stuff, all the different names, there's some wild ones. I mean, even right here, I mean, the other running back, the fullback, his name's Blasingame.
Which is sick, though. Like, that's cool. Like, I would buy a Blasingame jersey. I would not buy a Tuggle jersey. So really quick, like, before we move on to the rest of the games, do you feel that the season-long and best ball darlings, the guys like Isaiah Pacheco and Wan'Dale Robinson and these other rookies that are coming in, do you think that they get a disproportionately large amount of ownership compared to how good of plays that they are?
Yeah, I mean, I think because, by the second, third, fourth quarters when all the starters are out, I mean, these names are so many names that nobody actually knows. I think that a lot of casual players and I mean, maybe even some of the less casual players, but not DFS, pros and sharps, they kind of just gravitate towards the names that they know. So, like, everyone's been talking about Isaiah Pacheco throughout the offseason, so they're like, oh, like, this guy doesn't start, like, he's going to be like the second or third string, and he's going to play, so let's play him. So it ends up with like 25-30% of these rookies just because they're names that are known to a lot of people in the community.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. Okay, so we have a couple guys here that seem like pretty good options, but outside of that, so you just think it's mostly Pacheco and Ebner and Tuggle?
Yeah, Evans is like a really good running back and could play, but I think the fact that he's in his third season, he probably doesn't get very much run. So, yeah, I mean, as far as running backs go, I think Ebner and Tuggle are the top plays, and you can play Pacheco, but I lean don't, just because I think that he's probably going to be 25-30%. Maybe even more since it's only a 3-game slate.
Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and move on then to wide receivers. So what's your feel on wide receiver in this game? We know that Byron Pringle is likely not going to play. Velus Jones Jr., I don't remember the report on him. And we know
not going to play.
Not going to play?
Yeah, there's a ton there. We've got Pringle not going to play, Velus Jones not going to play, N'Keal Harry not going to play, David Moore not going to play, and Dante Pettis all not going to play for Chicago.
Wow, so it seems like Equanimous St. Brown is probably pretty good. And Tajay Sharp.
I like St. Brown, but I think I like Isaiah Coulter and Taj Sharp better. The beat reporters have been saying that those are the two guys that are playing with the starters in place of everybody else. And kind of like with the Giants and the Browns, I mean, these second stringers that are playing with the starters kind of ends up pushing them with two teams because they don't have enough receivers to only play them as starters.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Sharp and Coulter probably runs with the ones, then comes back and runs with the twos also, which is really nice. It means we might get a whole half of them.
Okay.
And they're fringe NFL players instead of fringe preseason players. So, the talent level doesn't hurt.
Cool. And what about the Kansas City side?
I think the Kansas City side's going to be hard outside of the starters. Like I said, with each quarterback playing a quarter with their respective units. I mean, I don't know that I really want a quarter of Cornell Powell or Omar Bayless. I mean, it's just not enough time to get, somebody with those talent levels. They certainly could still catch a touchdown, but, I don't think that it's likely. But I think having one of Juju, MVS, Mecole Hardman, or Travis Kelce, a quarter of them, I think, is pretty intriguing. I mean, I would say it's likely that one of them catches a touchdown. But I wouldn't have more than one on a team, I don't think.
All right. Tight ends necessary here?
Outside of Travis Kelce, I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll cut up that game. So we're focusing mostly on that Chicago wide receiver and running back side for that game specifically. Moving on to Carolina and Washington. What do you got for this game for quarterbacks?
So this is actually a good game for quarterbacks. On the Washington side, Ron wants to play the starters 15 to 20 plays, which, could be a quarter, maybe a quarter and a half. He said that the second unit would run until the middle of the third quarter, and then Sam Howell would finish the game. I think, having Sam Howell and Heineke both for a quarter to a quarter and a quarter to a quarter and a quarter. That's a weird sentence.
Weird sentence.
They both have rushing upside, so I think that those are really two nice bets, maybe to take some ownership from Mahomes, because Mahomes is going to be really high up there because it's Mahomes. But he doesn't run a whole lot. Hal does. Hal runs a ton. He's been running a lot in practices. We've seen Heineke. Heineke likes to run. So, whichever one of these two guys ends up with more than a quarter, gets the 1.25 to 1.5 quarters, I think is actually going to turn out to be a really nice GPP play here. And then on the other side of that, we've got Carolina, who they said that both Darnold and Baker should get 6 to 8 plays apiece, which is, really nothing. So then we've got Matt Corral and PJ Walker, who's going to split essentially 3 quarters. I think Matt Corral probably gets a lot of run as the rookie, with PJ Walker finishing up the game. So I think we could probably see 1.5 to 2 quarters of Matt Corral also.
Okay, cool. So yeah, Tyler Heineke, I think that play makes a lot of sense. I'm interested in this from a best ball perspective, just because I do have some Washington shares, up and down a bit. I'm very heavily exposed to Antonio Gibson, so I need this Washington offense to basically not suck. I don't really care if Carson Wentz is great. I just need them to not suck enough to get me Antonio Gibson touchdowns. So let's move on to running back. With that being said, what's the running back landscape looking like in this game?
For what it's worth, on your last point, I think the Washington offense is going to be decent, but I actually think that Antonio Gibson is going to get eaten a lot of his carries eaten from Brian Robinson than people think.
See, I don't think so. I just don't buy it. I think that, they can bring in those kind of guys, those, bruisers, right? But Ron Rivera, if you think that Brian Robinson is going to take early down work or short yardage work, then I think that you have to assume that J.D. McKissic is entirely phased out. Because Rivera doesn't want to use... Rivera has never used a full committee. He's never split that much. He said that he has wanted to do something like a Jonathan Williams as a bruiser back and a complimentary back, but I don't think that they're just going to kick Antonio Gibson out entirely based on how efficient he has been.
No, but I think Brian Robinson is more Kareem Hunt than Brandon Jacobs. Those are just the two that came to me where he's slow, but he's got really good vision and he can catch. And I think that's what a lot of people don't get, which kind of leads on to this, is that I think Brian Robinson's going to be a really, really great play today. I think, like I said, I think the public perception here is that he's like this slow bruiser back, but that's not what they've seen in practices. He's fluid, he's a really good vision, and they found that he can already catch pretty well, and he pass blocks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of running backs there today. We've got Gibson, Robinson, Patterson, the preseason darling last year, Jonathan Williams, and Bonifant. But I'm actually, I think, willing to take a shot on Brian Robinson here, hoping that he plays the second and third team as like the rookie that they want to see more of. And everything I've heard out of practice and stuff is that he's looking a lot better than expected, even.
Yeah. Word. So what about the Carolina side? What should we expect from that side?
Well, they have two fullbacks and then Christian McCaffrey. So, I mean, it leaves Hubbard, Deonta Foreman, Spencer Brown, and Darius Bradwell, which, anytime that I can get under 4 running backs, I kind of like to push it there. That was kind of Cleveland yesterday, where we picked the wrong ones. I took Dearness Johnson and Jerome Felton, ended up being Jerome Ford. I would say probably Spencer Brown or Bradwell would be the guys here because they're the two new guys to the team. They've seen Hubbard, they've seen Foreman. But Hubbard is the second year. So, like, in order of interest there, it's probably Spencer Brown, Chuba Hubbard, and then Darius Bradwell. But I would say probably one of them ends up seeing, 10 to 13 touches, which is pretty high for preseason.
Yeah.
So, having your exposure to the Carolina running backs, I think, is probably important in the slate.
Good. Okay, cool. And so let's move on to wide receivers then here. Wide receiver looks like we have a couple guys who are not slated to play. And then the Washington side, I imagine that we're probably going to get some looks at some of their younger guys. I don't know how much we're going to see of the Carolina younger guys because most of these guys have been around or, we've already gotten good looks at them. So how do you feel about this wide receiver?
So I think for Washington, I really wanted to play Jahan Dotson today, but I think he's going to get more of the Wan'Dale Robinson treatment than Romeo Doubs, which, Robinson came in and played with the starters and then left. Doubs was in for a couple quarters with Jordan Love. I think they've seen enough that, they're really not going to put him out there. If they do, I think Dotson could probably score a touchdown or two, honestly. But I just don't see it. But I think that's kind of going to leave room for Diami Brown as that guy who was a rookie last year, but he's kind of already been passed by Dotson and Samuel in the depth chart. So I think he might get a little bit of run with the ones and then hang around and stay with the twos. And he's really fast. He's got pretty decent hands. I think that it's, that he's a really good play here. Outside of him, though, I mean, there's 7 other wide receivers in the Washington roster. And I just don't think that that's a spot where you're really going to get enough opportunities to pay off unless they catch a touchdown. And at that point, it's just Russian roulette. You really have no idea.
And then the Carolina side.
For Carolina, let's see. Carolina also has a ton of receivers. I think that the starters, DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, are probably going to play with both Baker and Darnold. But, I mean, at max, we're talking, 16 plays?
Yeah.
Maybe DJ Moore's worth it there, but probably not. Outside of him, though, I kind of think maybe Rashard Higgins. I go to him because, he's got some fringe-level talent and might run with the 2s and 3s. There's a lot of those guys there. We've got Zylstra, who's been there for a couple years. He won me a lot of money in preseason last year. Andre Roberts, Rashard Higgins. Where none of these are super young guys. They're all fringe players. So I kind of just prefer staying with Chicago and maybe that Washington side because they're safer. But if you were going to pick one here, I'd say probably Zylstra, Higgins, and I don't know besides that. Maybe Sean Henry, just because I think he's a new guy that should get a lot of run. But none of these guys are standout plays to me.
Yeah, I didn't think so either. I didn't think this game was really where you're going to be looking for any really fantasy goodness on the early slate. Any tight ends that we need to care about here?
Yeah, so I think this actually probably is the game for tight ends. Both of these teams are currently dealing with a lot of injuries there. Carolina has Ian Thomas, Steven Sullivan, and Colin Thompson out. Tommy Trimble should get run with the ones, which is 12 plays, which only leaves Josh Babbix and Jared Scott to play tight end. Both of those will probably play, around a half. I don't know how talented they are, but they'll be on the field. And then on the Washington side, they've got Logan Thomas, John Bates, and Cole Turner, all also banged up, which leaves Reyes, Curtis Hodges, and Amari Rogers. So, between this game, we've got, 5 tight ends that probably should see a quarter and a half of play, which is really the most you can ask for. I think I still probably prefer Kelsey, but so does everybody else. So if you're going to be different here, taking somebody like Sammis Reyes, who should, I think, play with the ones and twos, or Babbitt's on the other side, who should get about a half. I think are both pretty decent GPP plays here.
Cool. Yeah, it seems like this game is. I mean, it's hard to think about it in terms of actual DFS perspective, but if I was looking at this game from a DFS perspective for regular slates, I would not touch it. Let's go ahead and move on here to the last game of the early slate. We've got the Colts and the Buffalo Bills. What do we got for the QB room here?
This is another good one. Since Josh Allen's not supposed to play at all, we're supposed to get Case Keenum and Matt Barkley only, probably half to half. And a half of Case Keenum, I think, is actually pretty decent. A guaranteed half of Case Keenum. We've seen a lot by him. He's an NFL backup quarterback, but talented enough to be an NFL backup quarterback. So I think for a half of Case Keenum, I actually feel pretty good about that. And on the Colts side, we're supposed to get up to a quarter of Matt Ryan. Up to a quarter is kind of scary because, if he comes out there and does really well, but it ends in a rushing touchdown on the first series, and we say, hey, this is enough, and we don't get anything else there. But a quarter of Matt Ryan is, if we were to get an entire quarter, is also kind of decent. At that point, I think I still prefer Mahomes and then maybe Case Keenum, but Matt Ryan is playable there. But, Matt Ryan taking up a whole quarter and then having Ellinger, Nick Foles, and Jack Cohn all split it, I kind of don't have a strong feeling of how that plays out. Sam Ellinger might get cleanup duty for a quarter and a half. But outside of that, I just don't see anything there that's probably worth playing.
What about the running backs?
For the running backs, for Indianapolis, we've got a lot of different guys. There's actually a lot of talent here. We've got Taylor and Hines, obviously, who I assume should play up to a quarter. I would really actually like it if they sat Jonathan Taylor and then started Hines, because then we're down to 4 running backs, and they're all nice running backs. That's ideal here. But if they play them both for up to a quarter, it leaves us Lindsey, Deion Jackson, C.J. Verdell, and Tyson Williams. Tyson Williams was that running back that did really great in Baltimore last year. He's last in the depth chart, so he should, I think, probably get the run with the last 2 teams, whether that's Ellinger and Cohn, or. And then there's also Phillip Lindsay, Deion Jackson, and C.J. Verdell. So, if I'm splitting that up by how I would go with the quarterbacks, it'd be Taylor and Hines with Ryan. Ellinger would probably get Lindsay. Nick Foles gets Deion Jackson and Verdell, and hopefully, the last guy gets Tyson Williams. So I think out of all of them, Tyson Williams is probably the one that I prefer, but it's not a good spot per se. On the other side, though, if we are assuming that the starters all sit, and James Cook's considered a starter, we're not sure yet. I'm waiting to see that. Then we're starting with Duke Johnson, Zach Moss, Blackshear, and Tywan Jones, and 3 out of 4 of those are NFL talents. Duke Johnson, Zach Moss, and Tywan Jones have all been on NFL rosters. They've done well. If we're able to get a quarter-ish with any of them, I think that they're probably a really good play on this only 3-game slate.
I could agree with that. And Duke Johnson, for sure, is going to have ownership just because his name is Duke Johnson. And the industry loves Duke Johnson.
I think Zach Moss probably picks up a good bit, too, just because people are going to recognize him. Which makes me think that Tywan Jones is probably the GPP play there. But, at running back, I'm more willing to eat the chalk than usual because you really just want playing time. And so I think that, if Duke Johnson is going to play a quarter to a quarter and a half at 30%, 40% ownership, you take it there.
Yeah. I hear you. All right, let's move on to wide receivers then. It doesn't look like there are a whole bunch of people out. We got 3 people confirmed. What else do you have here for wide receivers?
Yeah, so, on the Indianapolis side, Paris Campbell's out, Mike Strachan's out, then Michael Harris is out. They just signed DJ Montgomery. Even with those guys out, we're talking, 7-8 receivers. I think Pittman is probably the only one that'll be done for sure with the starters. Um, I haven't heard a lot on this team outside of training camp. None of these names really stick out. I'm thinking that Alec Pierce here will probably play like Romeo Doubs did, though. Where he's not confirmed a starter like Rondell Robinson, but that he's getting up there. So we might see Alec Pierce play with the first and second teams just to kind of get him in there and get him some reps. Outside of him, I don't really think there's anybody here on this Colts team that's probably worth prioritizing. Um, on the Buffalo side, though, I do like Khalil Shakir and Jake Kumaro because, like I said, we've now got it split down to where this is only 2 units and they're going to be coming in and out. If we assume we don't get any Diggs, Davis, or Crowder, it leaves only McKenzie, Shakir, Jake Kumaro, Isaiah Hodges, Tanner Gentry. So I think out of those, the fourth-round rookie, Khalil Shakir, and Jake Kumaro, who is a usual preseason darling, probably plays the most. Just because they have a lot invested in McKenzie, he might be starting. And then the other guys are all guys that are definitely not going to make the team. So I think Shakir and Kumaro are both, upper tier plays on this 3-game slate.
Word. And then moving on to tight end. What do you have for tight end for this game?
Tight end's wide open for Buffalo. Even if Dawson Knox is out, they have 5 tight ends. I don't think any of them are worth touching. I just think that they probably all run through. If we could get a quarter to a quarter and a half of O.J. Howard, I would like that. But, there's no guarantee there. And really the same thing with Indianapolis on the other side. So, I just think that none of these tight ends are guaranteed a lot of playing time. And with tight ends, you really just got to chase playing time because they make a minimal impact most of the time anyway.
Word. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. That there's really no reason to touch tight end here. I do like those wide receiver plays for Buffalo. You got to assume that they're not going to play a lot of McKenzie or Crowder at all. Those guys competing for that spot, Jameson Crowder is kind of old. Isaiah McKenzie is probably too important. So I certainly agree with that. Closing thoughts for this first preseason slate.
I did realize that on the Bears I missed a tight end. I skipped it. But they also have a lot of injuries there for the Bears. Like I said, tight end, very exciting, I know. But, for tight end, they actually have Kemet, Ryan Griffin, and James O'Shaughnessy out. It only leaves 3 tight ends. None of them are NFL talents, I don't think. Rice and John, Chase Allen, Jake Tonges. I've never heard of any of them, which is why I skipped over it. But, if you're looking for playing time, they're going to get it.
Perfect. All right. Well, this... Oh, you got... Last thoughts?
I was just going to say, as a whole, I was just going to try to say, my top tier plays here, I think that are Ebner, Coulter, Sharp, or Chicago. I think all of the Kansas City starters are viable. And then Brian Robinson and, what did I say for Washington? There was a receiver there. Brian Robinson and... Miami Brown. Those are all the ones I feel like are probably top tier GPP plays for today, with Shakir and Kumaru also thrown into there.
Sick. All right. Well, this has been a breakdown of the first preseason slate on the day. We're very likely going to record another one of these for the main slate after this, but in an effort to reduce the length of a podcast video thing here, we don't want you guys to be sitting here for 2 hours, so we're going to end this one now. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you have not checked out PaydorDFS.com, you should go do that. If you're not already part of the Discord, you should absolutely do that. It's free, and Hess puts all of his top priority plays in his spreadsheet. It's pinned in the channel. So if you're not already a part of the Discord, you should join. You can find a link on the site. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, my name is James McCool, and we will talk to you later.